John Pierpont Morgan, the famous banker and financier, once said, "No problem can be solved until it is reduced into a simple form. The changing of a vague difficulty into a specific, concrete form is a very essential element of thinking." Welcome to McBain Moments. Before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the Manor. Make sure you take a moment and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. Problem solving is something that I think everyone struggles with. I know I struggle with it. I know a lot of people struggle with it. And that doesn't mean that you struggle with every problem. It's that there are, in your life, you are going to come across difficult things that you can't quite get your arms around, and so they become more and more difficult for you to resolve. And by trying to resolve them and not really being able to get your arms around them, it becomes more and more frustrating when you can't resolve them. And so when I ran across this quote by J.P. Morgan, who was, by all accounts, a genius, and I mean, he managed to convince Andrew Carnegie to sell off his steel assets, which would have considered to be impossible, although he had the help of Carnegie's own CEO, Charles Schwab. It's important when you run across difficulty to take the time and break down what the pieces of the difficulty are and figure out, okay, if I break this down into its component parts, can I take it one piece at a time? Because if I can resolve each piece individually, well, that's a less complex problem. It's just a number of simple problems over time. And so that sounds it's almost mathematical, because you can always break math problems into its component pieces, and then you have order of operations, right? So, you've got this long equation, and you go, okay, first I've got to do multiplication and division. So you go through the equation, you solve all the multiplication and division parts. And then you go back and you do the addition and subtraction, and when you're done, you should come up with an answer. And so a big complex problem is not much different. You break it down into its component parts, and you say, okay, what pieces of this can be solved really simply? And you take care of all those parts, and you say, what pieces of this can be solved but are dependent on other parts being solved first? And you locate those, and you locate the ones that you need to solve before those pieces, and you solve those next. And so now you've got the simple stuff done, and now you've got the prerequisites done, and then you go back and you do the dependencies. And you solve each dependency that's attached to each of the prerequisite pieces. And sometimes it's going to be several layers deep. So you've got there's this big overarching problem, and you solve all the little peripheral simple issues, or maybe you save those for last. Maybe they're dependent on other things. But like the easy stuff that doesn't depend on anything else, and you're like, okay, I can put all those pieces back into place. It's kind of like a puzzle. And then you break it down into its pieces, and you're like, okay, well, I've got these 16 things that need to be solved. And so you go up to the top, and you're climbing the hierarchy of dependency on things that you have to solve before you can solve the other things. And you're like, okay, well, I've ordered them together, and I know that if I can solve this piece and this piece, then these other 8 pieces will become solvable. And so you solve the 2 pieces, and then you go down and you take it by, do it by the numbers. I don't care how you order them, but you then go to the pieces that relied on those 2, and you go, okay, now I can do this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And now with those 8 pieces solved, so you 2, 8, 10, you got the 6 left. And you go, okay, now I can solve these 6, and you go in. And sometimes it'll be even, it's, well, now I got to solve these 2 before I can solve these 4. And so there's a lot of wisdom in being able to break down a problem like that. And it's not easy. And in thinking about this quote, I was thinking about how a lot of the problems we run into in life are overwhelming, but they're overwhelming because we can't mentally break them down into their pieces. And that was quite the thing to think about. There are problems in life that are completely overwhelming, but the only reason they're overwhelming is because our brains cannot break them down into their pieces. And oftentimes, in order to do that, we have to go to someone who is outside of the problem So they can look with an outsider's gate because they're not emotionally invested in it. And not having emotional investment in a problem is something that will help a person analyze what's going on within the bubble of the problem. And sometimes you have to go to one of those people and help them. They can help you break down the problem into its component pieces. And by doing so, you might be able to start finding solutions to the micro problems that create the macro problem. I think that might be the purpose of a mastermind. So for those of you who don't know, masterminds are groups of people that get together for the common purpose of helping each other solve problems, generally within business, but it can be elsewhere. And so by sharing your difficulties with your mastermind can provide feedback. And because they're not emotionally invested in your problems, they can analyze it in a way that you as the person in the middle of it may not be able to. And they aren't being overwhelmed by it like you might be. You know, that's an attack on the mastermind, or a take on the mastermind I had not thought about until just now. Napoleon Hill, who wrote what might be the most important business management book of our time, he swore by the mastermind, and I could never understand why. And just thinking about this quote from J.P. Morgan, who was one of Hill's contemporaries. In fact, I'm certain that he was one of the people that Hill interviewed in the process of writing his book, Think and Grow Rich. I think that it was this very statement that he had in mind when he started to experiment and decide on why the mastermind was so important. And if I had never thought of that before. Looks like we all need to get ourselves a mastermind. Break down your problems. When you have problems or when you have difficulties, break them down. Write it down. Say, this is the big problem. What are the pieces to it? And write down the pieces. And then list the steps for each piece on how to solve it. And see if that helps. I think you'll find it does. And if you can't do that, find someone who can help you do it. There's always someone that can. Might not be who you expect either. Good luck out there. This has been a McBain moment.